All right, we have a link. I'm gonna steal your question, Ben. Or wait, no, the other one. Crap. How do I respond? Oh, there. I'm gonna type it. Okay, there's the link. There's the YouTube link for everyone. Hi, Larry.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm getting late getting things started. I started a backup on my Mac yesterday and thought I was going to finish. Yeah, so busy day.
So I can't seem to turn my video on, but you can hear me.
Yep,
there also does not appear to be a chat.
Yep. So we'll promote you to co-host here. It helps if I turn on my video. So all right. Yeah. Oh, it looks like I've got the background stuff going on.
Okay.
And
I have links to share during the talk, so I don't know how we want to do that if there's no chat.
Like normal. Okay, yeah. So we are we're using the webinar feature of Zoom, and so it's a moderated Q&A on Zoom. And what we do is for live chat, if you want to pull up the YouTube link, if you click on the Q&A section, there is a link to the YouTube video, and so we're just like streaming it live on YouTube, and there's live chat there that you can use to drop in links, and we've had really active discussion in the past on the YouTube channel.
The audio on it then.
Yeah, just make sure you mute the YouTube stream if you're doing both. All right. Let me give you 1 second here.
I'm getting a something went wrong for the chat.
Hello. Somebody say something in YouTube. Maybe we've had a problem once before, but.
And it looks like there's about a 10-second delay. That's longer than there usually is between Zoom and YouTube.
Yep. Yeah, it's when we're doing the Q&A at the end, we just have to be a little bit patient for the questions to come in. Looks like it's YouTube's working. Try refreshing maybe. Are you signed in? Maybe that might be.
YouTube chat's working now.
Aha. Stephen Johnson, no, David Stockton said minimize and unhide the chat seems to do it. So, all right then.
Have you tried turning it off and turning it on again?
Exactly.
On my phone, I had a retry button and I hit that and everything started working. So,
okay. So this will be interesting.
Yeah, so if we want to get, so typically, Larry, we get started kind of with a intro for the 3 user groups that are participating, and then we'll get into the presentation. since we didn't really have any kind of like prep time before everyone showed up, are we anything else you want to kind of like test on your end before we dive into it?
Say that again. Audio was a bit low.
Oh, yeah.
What do you want to do?
So typically we do kind of like intro thing for the three groups before we dive into like the presentation. I just want to make sure that you're good to go on your end before we kind of like dive into that part. And then like, surprise, it's ready. You're ready to go. And do you want to test something before we like officially start?
It should be fine. This is my third presentation in 2 days on Zoom, so the odds of it breaking suddenly when it worked a few hours ago are not zero, but small.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Well, Chris or Bobby, I'm not super prepared yet to talk about my side of things. And it looks like Ian might have some announcements as well from Austin side. So yeah, just somebody want to start?
I can go real quick. My stuff is real short and simple. 1 second here. Okay, just real quick about Atlanta PHP. We just like to thank our video sponsor, David Edmondson of Variux.com, as a local Magento integration shop. He's been a generous sponsor of our video archive for quite a while, so we just like to mention him. Also, as you see on our AtlantaPHP.org site, we have our video archive going back to 2012, so you can go back and find all our meetings. And also, we've got a Google group for discussion and job postings, and all our other information besides what's on Meetup is all here. So take a look when you get a chance, or if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me. Pretty easy to find, as well as contact info on that site. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Let me try sharing my screen.
Wait, Bobby, you're on mute. Start over.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It's not let me go back. There we go. So I'm Bobby Cahill. I'm lead organizer of Boston PHP, one of the three groups that makes up Merge PHP. Our home base is on Meetup. There's there's the link. We're also on Twitter, and we have a private group on Facebook. If you just join the group on Facebook, we just check to make sure you don't look like a spam account, and then we pretty much accept everyone who joins. Same thing with LinkedIn. There's a private group on LinkedIn you can join. We've been around since 2002, and this is an estimate, but we've had about 278 meetups since 2002. We currently have 3,842 members. I haven't checked with all the other meetup groups around Boston. For a long time, we were the largest tech meetup in Boston. I think there's maybe a couple other more generic ones that have gotten bigger, but our focus is on education, which as in education for new, like people learning new technologies and like more like traditional style education. We also do a lot of the idea sharing, which is typical of meetups where someone gives a presentation like we're doing tonight, and then promoting open source participation and that kind of thing. We do that through in-person meetups, usually not during the pandemic, but self-study groups is a thing we also do that Gene Babin runs. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then now I probably should, I think I said this the last time, I should take the new thing off, virtual meetups, because we've been doing for almost a year now, but that's how we meet those goals. And then there's our contact info. You can contact us through the meetup page. Anything related to virtual self-study groups, contact Gene, and basically everything else you can contact me. And tonight's presentation's right here. I'm going to let Logan give more detail about it, but that's it for my presentation.
All right, thanks guys. And sorry again for being late. Swear this thing was gonna finish transferring, and then it's like, all right, cancel everything. Crap. Yeah. Anyways, Austin PHP, we have been around since 2002, the longest running tech group here in Austin. We started doing a PHP conference back a couple years ago. You can find us on meetup.com/AustinPHP. If you go to the About page, there's some other links. We're on GitHub and a few other places. And we also have a Slack channel, so you can come join a bunch of other PHP developers. There's a number of people that used to live in Austin that still join us on there, and a fair number of Dallas and I don't know if we have. I think we have like outside of, it's not just Austin and Dallas people in there. A lot of Texas people or ex-Texas people. But the link for that is austinphpchat.com, and just click the top link there. And that's the main thing. And then a quick plug for a personal project I started 6 months ago, PHP and DevOps, if you're interested. Looking for writers, long form content, but it's just Medium/PHP ops, just to trying to grow up and generate some more interest. It's mainly just me, as you can see, and hoping to not be just me. So if you're interested in writing PHP or DevOps related content, just get in touch with me, and would love to work with you there. All right. So our speaker tonight, wait, I think, do I start recording? I think I'm supposed to start recording now. And there's all these recording things happening. All right, so recording. Is it recording? Annotate. What happened to the record button? Record on. Okay. All right, we're recording. Are we ready to get started? Thank you all for joining us here, February 2021. And I can't believe we made it. It's already February, and then it's going to be March sooner rather than later, since this is a short month. Thank you so much for speaking, Larry. I really appreciate you joining Merge PHP here this month. Larry is an accomplished speaker. He's spoken previously at a number of conferences on a variety of topics. The one tonight, I think, is going to be really interesting to a lot of people. Arrays is a data structure that we all know and love, and some best practices around them. I think we're all eager to hear what he has to say, and some practical applications of arrays and perhaps some better ways to do things in some scenarios.
All scenarios.
In all scenarios. That's it. The talk's over. We're good. Ian, did you have an update for Longhorn? I'm now realizing and about ready to switch over to Larry, but I said that, yeah.
We can't hear you, Ian.
Oh, it's still unmuted. Or not, it's still on
Are you
mute.
double muted?
Double dog muted.
Did I do
Still
something?
can't hear you.
So, Longhorn PHP, Austin, Texas. Assuming it's safe, you should go to it.
Yes. LonghornPHP.com. Blindbird tickets are now available. And maybe we can try to work out some audio issues, and then we can do an announcement at the end. Okay, I think that's a yes. Just go ahead and continue. All right, cool. Kind of disorganized tonight, so we're doing our best here.
Arrays are disorganized. That's kind of the problem. So
yeah,
it's on topic.
All right, guys. So Larry, if you want to take it away, I think we're ready to get started.
Okay.
In a very roundabout fashion.
All right. So I will steal the screen.
Yep.
All right. So thank you everyone for coming. We're going to talk about arrays and why you shouldn't be using them tonight. If you want to play along at home, I just dropped a link to the slides into the YouTube chat. So, excuse me. If you want to follow along there, you can. My name is Larry Garfield. You may know me online as Krell. If you want to make fun of me on Twitter during the talk, that's where you do so. I generally encourage it. I'm the Director of Developer Experience at Platform SH. I'm also a member of the PHP Fig Core Committee. For those not familiar with it, it's kind of like the United Nations of PHP with all the good and bad implications that has. It's kind of like PHP standards body. And I'm also the author of, among other things, Thinking Functionally in PHP, an ebook on functional programming in PHP. Yes, it's a thing. And I'm going to be giving away a copy of that at the end of the presentation. We're not quite sure how yet, but stick around if you want a copy of that. So, arrays. That's why we're here, right? PHP loves arrays. Arrays are like the iconic PHP data type. They're used everywhere. Code bases across the world use arrays a ton for all sorts of things. PHP has over 80 functions in its standard library just for working with arrays. And that's not actually a good thing. See, arrays come with an array of problems. And yes, the jokes are going to be that bad tonight. Fair warning. What kind of problems? Their behavior is actually very inconsistent. They don't always behave the way you expect them to behave. They have no type safety to speak of. By type safety, I mean, if you have an element in an array, or elements in an array, are they all of the same type? Who knows? They could, one of them could be an object, another could be a string, another is a file reference, another is an object of a different type. It's completely unpredictable. The error handling around them is not. It's kind of non-existent. And their performance isn't even that good to begin with. In fact, as we'll see, their performance is terrible compared to some of the other options. Of course, the biggest problem with arrays in PHP is that they don't exist. What does that mean? Okay, before we continue, we have to address the elephant in the room. I warned you the jokes were going to be that bad. When we say arrays, what do we actually mean? An array, in computer language speak, is an ordered sequence of values of the same type identified by an offset. if you talk to most language designers, most programmers in languages across the spectrum, that's what array means. The word array means that, an ordered sequence of values of the same type identified by an offset. PHP does not have that. What PHP has is associative arrays, also known as dictionaries or hash maps, which are arbitrary key value indices that nobody else calls associative array. They're always called a dictionary or a map or something like that. Numeric arrays are a hack, where if you pass in a value that, or if you don't pass in a value for a key, it will generate one for you that makes it look kind of like an indexed array, even though it isn't. And if you try to use a float value as a key, it will silently convert that to an integer for you, because that makes sense. And it won't actually round it. It'll just truncate it to an integer, because that makes sense. But if you pass a string that has a float value in it, then it's just saved as a string, because PHP. And of course, no type guarantees anywhere. Arrays in PHP are a hack, and they're a buggy hack. Let's have a look at a very simple example. We have a new array. We're going to add 2 values to it and print that out. What do we get? That's what we expected. Okay, cool. 2 values, index 0 and 1. Now let's delete a value out of that array and push another value onto it. Now what do we get? Oh, look, a gap. That's what we get. Brackets does not mean add value to the array. It means automatically create a numeric associative array key for me based on an internal counter maintained inside the engine. And that counter will just keep going up no matter what you do, which means if you take this array and stick it into a for loop, guess what? That breaks, because you're going to try to iterate 0, 1, 2, and there's no 1, therefore you're going to get an error. So even something as basic as a for loop is not safe in PHP. And in this case, AI is going to break. Just randomly accessing AI is a threat, which if you watched any sci-fi in the last 20 years, you would know. And it gets worse. This is real code out of real software in a database layer, a database abstraction layer. And the idea here is you can pass in a query string and arguments for it. But if the arguments are itself an array, then it will turn that into an in clause for you, essentially, by generating placeholder names based on your incoming data. And then you don't need to manually count up and align your number of question marks and values. It's a nice feature, but there's a little problem here. What happens if the array that is data has string-based keys in it instead of numeric keys? Those end up in the new array that you built here, new keys, and those keys are then placed directly into the query string, in the SQL string, without getting escaped. Hey, look, we have an SQL injection because arrays. This is a real piece of code from Drupal, which this was the worst security hole in the history of the Drupal project in 2014, called Drupageddon, because this lack of type safety in the database layer, combined with other bugs in the form API, added up together to be a remote anonymous user code arbitrary code execution issue. Those are called bad, which meant any Drupal site in the world, you could modify its database arbitrarily. This has long since been fixed. The fix was stupidly simple. Just grab rebuild the data array as values only, and then you're guaranteed to have numeric keys. But that's an error that, quite frankly, should not have been possible to write. The root problem here is that PHP uses arrays in place of purpose-built data structures. And that is almost always the wrong thing to do. So what should we be doing? Well, purpose-built data structures. They're not actually that hard to make, especially these days. So let's look at some examples of what a purpose-built data structure could look like. We'll start with your basic lists and sequences. For your super trivial cases, arrays can work here. We just have, a list of 3 or 4 values. But as we saw, they break down very quickly and sometimes in catastrophic ways. However, there's this object in PHP built in called array object, which gives you an object that operates kind of like an array, but lets you dig into it and override methods. In PHP, when we say data structure, what we mean is a class. Most of the time, when you say data structure, we mean class. Although in 8.1, we'll probably be able to say enumerations too. That's another story. As an object, you can extend it with your own code and then do what you want with it. So we'll have a class called typed array that extends array object. And we're going to hide the constructor on line 10 and say, all right, nope, you can't construct it yourself. You have to go through this for type static method on line 4, where you have to specify a type that you're going to filter against. And we just make a new object and save that to a property. And then when you go to set a value on typed array using offset set, that's a method that gets called when you use it like an array, we'll first type check and say, hey, the value that you're trying to assign, is it an object of the type that we're expecting? If yes, cool. If not, throw a type error because you are doing it wrong. We can now use that object, that class, instead of an array. In this case, we just create a new object and say for type point. So it will only accept objects that are of type point. We can assign a couple of them to them. It works for numeric keys and string keys. But then when we for each over it, we're guaranteed that inside that for each loop, point is always a point object. If it were not, it would have been a type error thrown earlier when it was first added. If we try to add something else to it, say an object that is not a point, or a string, or an integer, or something like that, a type error gets thrown because we're doing it wrong. The code is debugging for us. You always want your code debugging for you because that's way easier than debugging yourself. So that's a good start. What if we want to guarantee that it's a sequence? We don't want string keys. We just want a linear list of values. Okay. Again, let's make our own object for it. In this case, we'll not extend anything. We'll implement iterator aggregate and countable. These are both interfaces built into PHP. Countable means that there's this magic count method, line 12, that gets called when someone puts a count, the object into a count, so you can get back a number. And iterator aggregate lets you iterate over the thing that you're implementing it on, over the object, by returning an iterator to use in its place. So it'll work in a for each loop. You can for each over instances of this object. And then we have an add method that takes a value, and then we have the same for type trick as before, and the same type check before. So we know when something is added, its key is going to be a strict numeric value because we're storing it to an array internally, and we have no way to remove stuff. So we can guarantee that the integers for the keys are sequential, and we know the values are of the type we want. If you want, you can add other methods too, like a has to see if a value exists and so on. But you don't need to. You can add on whatever methods you want. It's your API, but it's your API tightly controlling what happens. Note, there is an array here. There is an array inside this object that actually stores the values, and that's okay because you are tightly controlling access to it and only allowing operations where you know what the implications are going to be, and you can account for them, and you can error out if those are implications you don't want. Now, one caveat here that someone is going to bring up, this is not quite the equivalent of an array, because arrays pass by value and objects pass by reference. Except that's not actually true. Objects do not pass by reference, they pass by value, just like everything else. But if someone is going to point out, if you modify an object, it modifies the same object. It's the same object before and after. So how can it be passing by value? Because what it's actually passing by value is a handle to the object, not the object itself. There's a distinction there in PHP, and this is whatever, and yeah. Long story short, yes, what is passing is a handle on an object. The object itself just sticks in memory in one place, which does mean that if you pass an object to another method, it is modifiable. That's not always great. In fact, it's usually bad. You want to have a mutable object where possible, but that's easy enough to fix ourselves. Slight change to our typed sequence object. In this case, though, add, instead of just modifying the value in place, it's going to do the type check, then make a new object and modify the values object in the new object to be what's in this object plus whatever the new value is, and return that. So this object never changes. Add gives you a completely new object that contains all of the old stuff plus your new stuff. Remove will check to see if a value exists, and if not, then it does nothing. It's a no-op, just return self. If it does exist, okay, make a new object that contains all of the same values as this one minus that one value you want removed, and then return that. So in neither case is this object ever changed. You can add additional methods to this as well to look up and analyze the object, but the data in it is never going to change after it's been constructed. This is actually fairly efficient in PHP because PHP has copy on write support, which means a lot of the underlying memory and values used to build these objects are not actually duplicated this way, because it's getting into the engine a little bit deep, but the key point here is that we're not replicating the entirety of the values, we're just replicating the bookkeeping around the values. The values themselves are not duplicated. Also note on line 18, we're calling array values on the new object when we are removing a value. So we're guaranteed that even the new object is going to have sequential values, 1, 2, 3, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. We're never going to have a gap in the list. Of course, at this point, this code is so easy, we can just make one-off for our particular data type. We want a collection of points. Okay, we have a collection of points, and we can just type hint those, and I really shouldn't stop calling those type hints. We can just type check the parameters, and the type system will enforce everything for us. This is really easy to make. It's nice and simple. You can make this for any object type you need, including primitives if you actually wanted to. All right. What about uniqueness? Let's say you want a unique list of values. Easy enough. Just override add to first check and see, is this value already in the list? If so, then great, just return self. Otherwise, do the same thing. This way, we're guaranteed to have unique values in our list, which makes it a set. Arguably, you shouldn't use inheritance here, but it fits on a slide, so whatever. That's a different debate. What if you care about the order? Here, we get a lot of fun. With arrays, you have to remember if you ordered it or not, if you sorted it or not. With an object, you can wrap the values around, or operations around your data. In this case, we're going to enhance this for type method to take a type to check and a comparison value, which is sum callable. Then everything is the same, but when we call get iterator, so we're going to for each over it, we first sort the values we're storing using whatever that comparison operation was, and then return that. So we don't need to think about sorting and is this value sorted or not. We just start iterating it, and we know it's going to be sorted on the fly for us. And the user of this object doesn't need to think about that. So we can now create a comparison function. I'm just using short lambda syntax here. Given 2 points, it's going to return an integer. We're going to sort by x value and then by y value. And that's what that cool spaceship operator does there. Sort first ax versus bx, and if those are the same, then sort ay versus by. So now we create an ordered set for type point with that comparison, add a couple of points to it. We don't think about ordering. We just for each over it, and boom, the stuff is in the order we expected it to be, the order we want when stuff comes out. At this point, though, the code is simple enough. You probably are better served just making a dedicated set class for the particular values you're working with. So I want ordered points. Great. Here's a point set class. It implements iterator aggregate. It's got the has method we talked about. It has an add method we talked about. It has a remove, same deal. We're just internalizing the comparison operator here. So we can now type everything. We don't have, as a user, I don't have to think about the comparison function. It's just there. I can take this object, throw values into it, iterate it, and they come back in the order I want. And I don't have to do anything else with it. What have we gained by wrapping arrays in objects with a custom API? We have guarantee of type safety. If we want a list of points, we're going to get a list of points, and we're guaranteed that that's the case. We don't have to think about what else might be there. If we want something to be a sequence, we can guarantee it's in a sequence. If we care that something is immutable, we can guarantee that it's immutable. We get an API that is more self-documenting. If you want a method that makes more sense in context than add or remove, great. Call it something that makes sense for your particular use case. Add user, add point, include additional customers, whatever makes sense for your case. And we can encapsulate additional functionality like sorting or set operations on the entire list into these collection objects. And what makes sense there? I don't know. It's part of your domain. Make something that works for your domain. And you've now built a domain object for a collection that has all of these guarantees, and it doesn't even take very long. Every one of these examples that I just showed took me under 10 minutes to write. Most of them took me less than 5 minutes to write. The takeaway here is not use this exact code. It's writing code kind of like this for your specific use case is way easier than you think. And you should just go ahead and do that rather than trying to use arrays. Building real data objects, real data structures instead is fast and gives you a huge benefit. One caveat, though, is that lists that are an object list like this, you can't actually pass it like an array. You can't type in something as array and pass an object to it. Well, obviously, it's not an array. So what do we do about that? Well, there's two different use cases to think about here, and we deal with them differently. First, do you care about the type of the objects? Are you writing a function or a method that wants a list of something specific, like products or points or whatever? Cool. Make a data type specific to that type that you're iterating, like product list or point list or customer list or whatever, and you're done. Implements traversable, implements iterator aggregate, whatever, and you're guaranteed that what you get there is in fact a list of the object you think it is. This is now a part of your domain model. You can treat it like any other object in your domain model and do domain model-y type stuff with it. What is that? I don't know. It's up to you. It's your API. The other case, you just want to for each over something. Okay, then type it as iterable. Iterable is a type introduced in PHP 7.1 that basically means for eachable. An iterable value is one that you can put into for each and it actually will for each. Iterable means arrays or objects that implement traversable. Traversable is a core engine interface you typically don't implement yourself, but you'll implement either iterator or iterator aggregate. You saw iterator aggregate before. Iterator is the slow version, basically, if you need to do things more manually. Most importantly, though, the iterator you'll use most often are generators. Generators are lovely. I love generators. Generators are functions that will create a lazy stream of values. And those values can be returned one at a time. They can even be created one at a time. You can return an infinite sequence of values that don't exist until they're requested. You can also use it to then flatten a more complex structure into a linear list of values. And the code for it ends up being a lot simpler than the alternatives. As an example, PSR 14 from the Framework Interoperability Group. This is the event dispatcher interface. It has an interface called listener provider interface, which has a method get listeners for event. It's supposed to return a whole bunch of callables that you can then call with an event object. And what that method returns is an iterable, not an array, an iterable. Why? Because all we're going to do is for each over it. So iterable is the minimal definition we need. Ideally, we could say iterable of callables, but PHP doesn't support that yet. But iterable is the least restrictive thing we can say here. All we're going to do, this is your fairly bog standard dispatcher in PSR 14, is line 6, call get listeners for event, and iterate over the result. That could be an array, or it could be a generator. We don't care, so that's all we ask for. And then we just call each of those listeners with the event. That means the implementation of get listeners for events could return an array. It could do stuff with the database. It could do arbitrarily complex logic like this, where we actually introspect an object stored on the event and see if that has a method on it and then return that method as the listener. So they're doing this kind of weird loopback. Don't worry about this code. You don't need to read it. The point here is this yield command on line 14 is return back this callable, pause here, and then the next time the for each iterates, pick up right where we left off and keep running. So this way I can take an arbitrarily complex data structure or an arbitrarily complex set of rules and just spit out and pause a value. This also makes them trivial to concatenate. If you have multiple providers, you want to glue them together one after another. This is like the generator version of array merge. Then great, I got an array of providers internally, provider objects, and I just loop over them and yield from each of them in turn. Yield from is generator speak for each over it and yield each value. So it's just a shorthand. So what we get back here returned is all of the callables returned by the first provider, followed by all of the callables for the second provider, followed by all the callables from the third provider in order, one at a time. And the caller doesn't care about any of this. This is real utility code out of the Event Dispatcher utility library. Go ahead and use it if you want. And it's trivial code that gives us a lot of power and flexibility. Of course, we mentioned before, there's 80 some odd array functions. Those aren't going to work on objects that are iterable, only on arrays. But so what? How often have you used any of those 80 array functions? In practice, I don't use most of them. You can make them internal implementation detail of one of your objects, if it makes sense, because then you're wrapping something meaningful in your domain around it. It's called a method. And if you actually need it directly, it's really easy to re-implement. The only two I use with any frequency are array map and array filter. Okay, here's map and filter for iterables. That's it. That's all you need. Occasionally I'll need something else, but for the most part, this is it. And they're trivial to implement, as are most of the others if you really need to. Which means we can go a step further. Let's combine all of this together and create a generic lazy collection object. Again, we're going to disable the constructor and keep a list, and the collection is wrapping a generator. We can initialize it statically from a generator, in which case we just take that generator function and save it. Or if we're passed an iterable of some other kind, which could be an array, it could be an iterable object, doesn't matter. We wrap that into a generator and store that. And then calling getIterator is simply, all right, invoke the generator itself and return that. And so for each, we'll just happily for each over that generator, lazily returning values. If we want to add to this collection, we have an append method that takes more iterables. And then it'll take multiple on a line there. That's the splat operator. I love that name. And it will return a new instance of collection whose generator is going to first yield from the generator in this object, and then all of the new ones that were added. Follow? It's a bit tricky. If you want to add just independent items, well, great. A bunch of items is an array, and an array is an iterable, so it's just a special case of that. One is a special case of many, also known as Garfield's law. Really, all we're doing is the same concatenation we just saw, just more so. If you want to have an operation like map on the list, great. That is a new object, a new collection, whose generator is going to loop over all of the values coming from the previous generator, which itself is possibly stacked, and call the map function on each one of them and yield that. All of this is happening lazily until you call toArray, which we'll call this iterator to array function, and then everything gets evaluated and turned into an array. One caveat here, because the keys are going to be the same in each of these generators, they're going to start with 0 in each time. That actually means iterator to array is going to fold them together and overwrite all of the earlier ones. So we have to use a generator that yields blindly through everything. It's a little annoying, and it ends up looking a little like JavaScript on line 16. And I shouldn't say that because JavaScript doesn't look like that anymore, but you get the idea. You could easily add things like filter if you wanted to, or other methods. I'll leave that up to you. They're just as simple as this. And then using it is nice and simple. We call collection from iterable to create a new collection object, initialize it with the iterable 1, 2, 3, add a couple of values to it, call map on it, and until we call toArray, nothing actually happens. But on line 6, we call toArray, that goes through, iterates everything, maps it, and we get back the results we want. So we have a lazy, immutable, generic collection that took about 60 lines of code, give or take. Should you use this object yourself? Probably not. The point here, there actually are existing collection libraries that do essentially this. I'm not sure I would use them either. The takeaway I want you to have here is that it's easy to implement this. It's not a lot of code. It's not a lot of time once you understand the concept. If you want to have an ordered set like we saw before and add a map or filter operation to it, that takes 90 seconds. Doesn't matter. You can do it using a lazy approach or a greedy approach. Either way can work depending on what you need to do. It's 5 lines of code. Don't necessarily look for the generic. Look for, all I need to do is write a little bit of code to express what I want to do. And then I don't have to think about the arrays. I think about what I want to do in my domain objects. But that's all just lists. What about that whole other half of PHP arrays when you actually want the keys to be strings and you want associative arrays because you're using the associative array logic? Well, again, there's 2 different use cases here. Lookup tables and anonymous structs. We'll look at each of them in turn. Lookup tables are cases where you want to map from one arbitrary value to a different arbitrary value. Your keys are going to be ints or strings only. Usually it's like an ID of some kind. These work really well for user-supplied data. When you don't know what the keys are going to be in advance, they're IDs from plugins, they are user-provided information. It's something that you can't just hard code. So you end up with patterns that look a lot like this. Do some kind of logic, build up a an array keyed by some lookup value that gives you a bunch of objects. And then you just pull the key out of some user input, drop it in there, look up the right object, and then you can use that object. Great. Where's the error handling? What happens if you have there's no builder that corresponds to that ID? What if, are you guaranteed that all these builders are the right type? Are they all going to have a build output method? I don't know. What you can do instead, very simply, you can build your own lookup utility rather than relying on just an array. In this case, we'll implement array access, so it still has roughly the same API. We'll do that same for type logic as before to enforce the type, but we'll also accept a default. And that'll be a default object here. And then offset set, we do the same type check, ensure that the offset is a string, not a random number. And the value is going to be whatever the type is we're making a lookup table of. And then we go to access it with offset get. If the value is specified, it's in the list, then great, return that. Otherwise, return the default value. You end up using that like this. Create a lookup object for type output builder, give it a default, go ahead and add stuff to it, and now you're guaranteed that what comes back on line 8 is going to be an instance of output builder. Regardless of whether there was a matching object or not, you'll get back something. So this is an improvement. Of course, you may not want to use array access. It is in fact slower than just using a method. It's in fact 3 times slower than calling a method. All right, so let's make an object that's a lookup table that doesn't use array access. Do the same for type logic. We'll have an add method, but now we can just type the key as a string in the method signature. And now we can provide the default on line 15 in the lookup. So instead of specifying in advance, we can specify it when it's asked for. Which is better? Your API, you tell me. Either way is perfectly viable depending on what it is you're trying to do. But you get to make that decision. That said, this code is simple enough. Let's just go ahead and make it a purpose-built service. We'll take, in this case, a builder provider. We'll pass that into our builder map. We'll pass in a default by string rather than by the object. Then we don't need to add anything. The add happens internally in the object. The first time you try to look something up, if the builder's internal array is not populated, then we call build lookup and then build our lookup table that way. And then if the value that we're looking for isn't there, then we return whatever the default is by its default format. Same safety, but pushed further back into the service layer, which means it's then trivial to use. I can just call lookup and use that. I don't need to build anything. The build the lookup table part disappears into the service where it belongs. As the consumer, I don't have to worry about that kind of thing. And everything here is type checked because it's purpose built to output builders, whatever those are. And so I'm guaranteed I won't get back the wrong object. If the wrong type of object is specified somewhere, I'll just get a type error. My static analyzers can fix that for me. So this is good. What about the other one? Anonymous structures. This is for cases where keys are known in advance at development time. It's very common in PHP to see this kind of pseudo object passed around, say an order. I'll say order object, but it's not really an object by any means. It's got a couple of properties, cool, but is canceled spelled right? Does canceled have one L or two? Anyone know? Both. Which one is legal depends on which side of the Atlantic you're on. I'm not kidding. 2 L's is the UK version, 1 L is the US version. The US often takes the 2 L version too. So, could be right, could be wrong. I don't know. Is that a bug? Maybe. Is USR supposed to be abbreviated like that? Or am I missing an E? I don't know. Is the user ID, is the order ID supposed to be a an ID number, or is user supposed to be a user object? I don't know. Are those SKUs supposed to be numbers or strings? I've got a little of each. Which one is correct? I don't know. Is this one of those cases where you can specify a single value instead of just an array for the SKUs, and it will, fold it up to an array? I don't know. Are there other optional properties here that I don't even know about? I don't know. What's the total in? Is that in dollars? Is that in euros? Is that in yen? I don't know. You're using a float for that. Floats, using floats for money is always the wrong idea. What's better than anonymous structs? Give them a name. Make it an actual class. Oh, I now know the ID is a string, not an integer. All right. I know that the user is spelled wrong before. It's actually USER, and it's supposed to be a user object, not just an ID. Canceled is spelled with 2 L's. That's the correct spelling, and it is optional because its default is false. SKUs have to be an array. All right. This is better in every possible way. It's more self-documenting. It's less likely to break on you. It's easier to use. And in PHP 8, we can go even further and make them promoted properties from a constructor. And we can now call order with a constructor with named parameters to just create this thing on the fly. And then we have, in a single line, created an object with defined property names that we can debug, that we can verify the spelling on, the default values. Our IDE can suggest things for us and tell us when we get it wrong. Everything about this is superior to using arrays. I also often see code like this. You've got some kind of function. It has one required value and then options. Options is the second worst variable name in all of programming, right behind data. What are its values? Oh, are they required values? I don't know. Are they spelled US style or UK style? What are their legal types? Is it going to be picky about string versus float or integer, or array or array of integers or a single integer? I don't know. I know nothing here. This code tells me nothing. All right, well, we should document it. All right. Now we know that the options are label, background color, font size, and layout. But, oh, right, we specified background color twice because, right, docs are not maintained because people are lazy. So this is better, but I'm sure you've heard someone say that good code is self-documenting. If you need to document it, you're doing it wrong. That's kind of true, not entirely, but kind of true, which means objects are self-documenting. We've now replaced that entire doc block with proper properties, even promoted proper properties. Try saying that 5 times fast. We know what the options are. We know their types. We know which ones have a default value and what that is. We know that layout is required. It's not optional, which means probably that one should be listed first in the list here, unless we want to just use named parameters. Cool. This tells us so much more and enforces so much more so that we can get so much less wrong without it being a syntax error. You want your bugs to be syntax errors. Objects, however, can also go a step further and have methods. So we can have all these properties and then have static constructors that take layout, the one required property, and then you can set the others. In PHP 8, you can even set the others as named parameters. So you can say for layout, name of layout, color colon some value, label colon some value, and that'll work fine. And then you can have other methods for more robust descriptions like toggling dark mode because that's trendy or whatever. What does dark mode mean? Dark mode means set this set of colors. Okay. You want something more robust? Okay, it's your API. You come up with an API that makes sense. At this point, though, we really should just turn it around. We have this object with all these values, all these properties that will control what happens in the formatter. Why is this not the formatter? Let's just make that the formatter. We now have a product formatter object. It has the properties inside it, and it has methods that make sense for its API to toggle dark mode, set the font. Oh, we know the font is in points now, not in pixels. And on that, we have a format method that takes just the product and can now use all of those values that have been configured through this purpose-built API and return the formatted value. And this becomes so much easier to use than trying to figure out what that array means. We just create a new product formatter, call some methods on it, and call format. And we're guaranteed that the types are correct. We're guaranteed that the values we need are there. We're guaranteed that it's not quite the if it compiles, it's right, but we're certainly a lot closer to that than using arrays. If the product formatter method, the format method has some dependencies on it, okay, spawn that doer object off of the theme system or some other service. Have a service that will give you a prepared and ready to use doer object, which you can then continue to configure for this one specific instance and then use it. Create a do object and then do something with it. The array has disappeared entirely and turned into a self-documenting API that is cleaner, less bug prone, and probably faster than what the arrays were originally. Now, I've had public properties in these objects to date, and someone is probably going to tell me that public properties are evil and you should never use them, and I'm probably the person saying that. I will caveat that. If you have an object that you're just using internally, it's not part of your API, I'll give you permission. You can go ahead and use public properties for that, as long as you mark the class as internal and not part of your API. So if someone externally relies on it and you break it, well, that's their problem. If it's part of your public API, then yeah, you should go ahead and make the properties private or protected, give it meaningful methods to manipulate them, and all of that good stuff. So depends on your use case. Whew. So this is great. This is wonderful. This is superior in every way. What about performance though? Aren't objects just big and slow and gum up the works, and our arrays are fast, right? This is an urban legend. It might have been true in the PHP 4 era. I'm not sure. It's true potentially in something like C, where the arrays are actual arrays and really just pointer arithmetic. But PHP is not C. So, all right, let's test it. I ran some benchmarks a few years ago. This would have been like in the 7.3 era, I think, maybe 7.2. I don't think anything has changed dramatically on this front since then. Where, all right, let's take an array, and let's make an array of arrays that are just a string and an integer, and then manipulate it a bunch. We don't actually care about sorting here. I'm just using that as a convenient way to work the array a lot by sorting it one way and then sorting it another way. And then time it. And I had the same thing using an array of standard class objects, array of defined class with public properties, defined class with methods rather than accessing the public properties, and an anonymous class. Did a whole bunch of runs, averaged them out, all the standard benchmarking stuff. Our goal here is just to work with arrays and try to read off an array, a few million times. So what were the results? With an associative array on my computer, it took about 9.4 seconds and used about 0.5 GB of memory. It was 1 million items. Standard class objects took 11.2 seconds, nearly 20% slower, and about 9% more memory. Never use standard class objects. They have absolutely no value in modern PHP. They are dead. Stop using them. End of story. A class with public properties on it was nearly 13% faster, and holy crap, more than 53% more memory efficient. It used less than half as much memory as the arrays did. Less than half. The private property version, bit slower because we're calling through methods, so that adds some overhead, but the memory is still less than half. Anonymous classes, those actually were the fastest and used less than half as much memory. I expected it to be more performant. I did not expect it to be this big of a difference. This is huge. When I published my results, someone else took that and ran with it and said replaced all of his object-like arrays with classes where they are used thousands of times. His memory usage was reduced 58% from 12 gigabytes to 5 gigabytes. Why? What's he doing that with PHP that takes 5 gigabytes? I don't know. I don't want to know, but it's a lot better than 12 gigabytes. Why is this? Because the class is predefined. The engine, a PHP engine, is able to look at that class, say, oh, I know what the properties are, I know what their types are, and optimize its internal structure. So the data structure used in the engine to store the representation of an object is more efficient than the data structure used to store the representation of an array. If you care about performance, you will minimize the amount of arrays you use. Certainly, anonymous structs have zero argument for them. Not on usability, not on performance, not on debuggability. They have nothing to speak for in their favor. So is it ever okay to use an array in PHP? A couple of places. As an internal implementation detail, that's fine. If you have a list of things, there's going to be an array in there somewhere. Wrap it in an API that is what you want it to be, and you'll be happier. You need to use it for an array literal for iterables. You know, that's fine. If you're passing something to an iterable, passing an array is acceptable. If you have a callable, you want to call a method, that's PHP syntax, that's what you have to do. If you're doing something in PHP 8 with dynamic named arguments, where you build up right in one spot a named array, a keyed array, and then pass that with the splat operator to a function so that it turns into a named method call, I'm going to say that's okay. And in generated code, this is a weird edge case where I think this is the only place that an associative array has anything going for it. Because if you do something like this, if you're generating out a compiled container or a compiled event dispatcher or something like that, then this data will not be data. A const array will get loaded into code memory, not into process memory. And so that will not get duplicated across 5 parallel processes. Each of those 5 parallel processes will share a single copy of it in memory, making this more efficient if it is statically coded. Note, however, that you're still, when you're accessing it, returning a real object based off of whatever that data is, because that's then superior for the consumer of it. So really, yeah, you should never use arrays in PHP in public where people can see them. Thank you. For more cool stuff like this, I have a new book out, Exploring PHP 8. It's a free download from the Platform SH website. I'll drop a link into the Zoom chat, or excuse me, it's a YouTube chat for that, as well as Thinking Functionally in PHP, published through LeanPub, on all the cool ways you can actually do functional programming in PHP. Yes, it's a thing. It's a very good thing, in fact, and it's going to get better in future versions of PHP. We're working on that. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions at this point, or we can raffle away a copy of Thinking Functionally. Not sure how we want to do that. Organizers, do you want to just do it randomly, or should I do some kind of quiz in YouTube?
Let's see. I guess, well, maybe Ian, if you're ready, do you know if Raffler is ready to go for web presentations? Good test of your audio here. we Ian built a raffle tool, but it uses phone numbers, and so we were using it for our in-person meetups, but we haven't rewritten it to be more web friendly yet.
Okay, I could also just do a trivia question and do it that way if you'd prefer.
Yeah. Let's do trivia on the YouTube chat. Can we make sure that can you say something in the YouTube chat, because they were saying earlier that it wasn't working when you were dropping links. So I mean, I'm assuming you can see the chat, right?
Yeah, I can see the chat and the links show up there. So I'm not seeing any audio issues. Can y'all hear me right now?
Oh, yeah. I guess I'm not listening on YouTube. I think they can hear you. They're saying like, great
Okay.
talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll do it like this. Whoever can answer this question in the YouTube chat first, just the first name I see, wins the book. So arrays in PHP have two different ways you can express them. One is the word array followed by parentheses. The second is with square brackets. What PHP version introduced the square bracket version of arrays? I just want the version number and whoever I see first in the chat. And Rod Elias with 5.4 is the correct answer. Congratulations, Rod.
Nice.
Yep. Send me a DM on Twitter with an email address, and I can send you a coupon code or a coupon link to grab a copy of the book. I'm just at Krell on Twitter.
So when did the Thinking Functionally book come out?
Thinking Functionally came out May of last year, I believe. So it's written for 7.4. Nothing really changed in that regard in 8.0. If the things I'm working on for 8.1 all happen, then there will be a new edition for 8.1 that is about 2/3 rewrite. So
Cool.
Fingers crossed we pull that off. I'm hopeful. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it gets better with every version.
Just give us a few minutes here to go through questions. If anybody in Zoom has questions, now would be a good time to hit that Q&A button and then drop the question in there. Just for the sake of, to make it easier on the organizers, just try to ask the question in one channel, and I promise we'll get to it. But yeah, either the Q&A section in Zoom or the chat in YouTube. And while we're collating questions here, I'm going to make sure that everybody has links to both of these books. We'll just be doubly sure that it's working here.
You can post real links. I can't. I guess that's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so the first one is that PHP 8 book, and then there's that bit.ly link. I think I just like copied, I typed in, so I'm pretty sure I got all that right. Let's see here. So,
and then the slides themselves are the other link.
Oh, right. The slides had that here. I think there was a link in the Chris had posted a link to the slides. It's the Garfield Tech presentation slides. That link.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I'll post it on YouTube. I think that works.
I don't see a clickable version of those, but Yeah, it's in the back scroll, just posted by me. And there we go.
Cool.
So, any questions?
Let's see here. I like the options part. I think we're all guilty of using options, like, in the past. And I totally agree with Zimzat or Asajaz in YouTube. He said, "Rip standard class." I was quite surprised by the performance there, the differences there. Oh, looks like Ian is dialing in.
Oh, hey, look,
He's back.
my audio works. 1 second.
Oh, got a reverb, probably with YouTube.
All right, now we're good. Apologies for that. Continue on.
Let's see here. So, one question I had for you, Larry, was it seems like, when you're adding all these like defined data structures, it's going to make testing a lot easier. Like, would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. The purpose of a type system, actually, there's many purposes to a type system, but one of the biggest and most important in my mind is structuring your data in such a way that invalid states are unrepresentable, so that certain error conditions you physically can't get into. So
like you don't have to test for like, negative, 1,000 decimals, or super long strings, or super,
what happens if someone passes an array to my method that contains not just point objects but something else? Well, if I'm passing in a point list object instead, I know that that's impossible to happen. It can't happen. Therefore, I don't have to worry about that error case. It just goes away. And structuring your code with that in mind, so that the type system makes it impossible for you to create certain types of bugs, reduces the amount of testing you need to do dramatically. It does not eliminate it. Typing is not a substitute for good tests, but they complement each other. And the better you're typing, the fewer tests you need. You still need tests for your actual business logic, but a lot of error cases are just gone.
It saves you
that's a good
thing. Like the edge, having to spend time on those edge cases.
Yeah, it just reduces the edge cases that are even possible to happen, and so you don't think about them.
Great. I'm gonna call on Bobby or Chris. I'm like scrolling up here.
Real quick, I wanted to mention, I keep forgetting that I've had JetBrains licenses to give away from their user group program.
Oh, yes.
So basically, if you're not familiar, basically it allows you to a year's license to any of the JetBrains products. A lot of people I know use PHP Storm, but you can get into any, their PyCharm or their I forgot the name of their Go one, but any of their products you can use. So probably the smoothest way to do it is the first 3 people to email me, I can give you the license code for it. So you want to email me at Chris, CHRIS, at AtlantaPHP.org. That's ATLANTA PHP.org. And you don't have to be from Atlanta. Anybody's open. And we'll see if we can give those away. So, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, for doing that. Well, I'm not seeing any specific questions. There's lots of comments to go through.
I answered everyone's questions. I'm just that good.
I know. You are a very good speaker, Larry. I think you all give us something to strive for in terms of your ability to communicate, technical topics. So thank you so much for speaking. I don't want to wrap up just yet though. Ian, it looks like maybe you're dialed in on your phone. You want to?
Yeah, I'm dialed in on something that for which audio actually works. Hashtag Linux audio problems. Ignore the fact that my phone runs Android and is thus hashtag Linux without audio problems. So earlier on, there was some quick discussion of Longhorn PHP. You may have noticed when the page loaded up that those dates are no longer May. Those dates are correct. We need to get around to actually emailing people, but we do have a revised contract with our physical venue such that assuming that we get vaccines and such where they need to be, and assuming that we don't have some crazy mutant coronavirus thing going on, we will be having an in-person conference in mid-October, 1 week before Formula One. So if they have to cancel, then we have bigger problems and we'll be postponing again. But the call for papers is open. That's cfp.longhornphp.com, and ticket sales are likewise open at longhornphp.com. It's going to be a while before we close down Blind Bird tickets, but that's all open. We are still committed to having an in-person conference whenever it's safe to do so. If you want a conference that happens significantly sooner, though, Midwest PHP, I believe that is at midwestphp.com. Let me double check to make sure that I'm not sending you to somewhere random. Midwestphp.com or .org will both take you to the Midwest PHP 2021 site. They are having their conference in late April, entirely online. So kind of in the meantime, go there, but plan on health conditions permitting a conference here in Austin in October.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think I saw some ticket sales come in. So it's good to see we're generating some interest. I
think those ticket sales were just Daniel testing the thing to make sure that things were working.
Good. Awesome. Well, Larry, please consider joining Merge PHP. As an attendee in the future. We'd love to have you back as an attendee or a speaker. Looking forward to seeing more of your talks. Chris or Bobby, any last words of wisdom to chime in?
I just want to say thanks again to Larry. I've seen you present numerous times in person, and it's always a pleasure and super informative. So we appreciate you coming out for us tonight. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks to Larry for volunteering his time, and thanks for everyone who joined. It's good to see everybody.
Awesome. I guess I should probably plug Gene's. Gene has the next study session coming up on Git. Check out the Boston PHP meetup page, and you'll have some more information there. I think Bobby usually does a good intro on how those work, but hit Bobby up or any of the organizers up, and we'll be happy to get you connected with the study session. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. It's February. Valentine's Day on Sunday coming up this weekend.
Yep.
Looking forward to more great online virtual events coming with Merge PHP. And thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.
See you all next month.
Everybody.
See y'all.